Hello and welcome to the Festival of the Muses. This live stream is presented by the Center for Hellenic Studies in collaboration with the Isadora Duncan International Institute, the Ecumenical Delphic Union, and the Committee for the Reinstatement of the Delphic Games. I'm Lana Coley, and I'm so excited to introduce the next panel, Epic Hymns and Invocations. You'll hear from researchers who are working to uncover the earliest evidence for ancient Greek music, and you'll meet musicians who continue to set new music to ancient texts. To begin, I'm honored to welcome to our virtual stage Bettina Joy de Guzman. Bettina is a multi-instrumentalist, educator, and classicist who composes music inspired by ancient cultures from around the world, especially ancient Greek music and poetry. She performs and lectures in various universities and museums internationally. As Regents Fellow at the University of California in Irvine, she taught ancient Greek and Roman history as well as mythology. Please welcome Bettina Joy de Guzman.
Thank you, Lana. It is an honor to be here. Today I begin with Queen Penelope. In Homer's Odyssey, composed around 700 BCE, Penelope must entertain the suitors who have insisted on staying at her home until she chooses one to marry. We are given glimpses of her sorrow alone in her chambers when all she wants to do is sleep to escape. Odyssey, Book 18. Penelope lamenting. Sappho, of Lesbos, was widely regarded as one of the greatest lyric singer-songwriters during her time, from around 600 BCE. In this poem, the speaker invokes Aphrodite, who assures her not to worry about her object of affection. Even if she flees, she shall soon follow, and if she loves not, shall soon love, however unwilling. Sappho, Fragment 1. Sophocles wrote his tragedy, Antigone, around 441 BC. This comes from the chorus introducing the play, singing to the sun. Sun's first rays, light more beautiful than ever shone on seven-gated Thebes, you shine at last, eye of golden day, gilding Dirce's lapping streams. These lines describing Thebes' natural beauty contrasts against the armored and white-shielded Argive warriors in frantic retreat. Antigone, Parados. Atisa Eliu, Tokaliston hepta piloi fanen, te baiton proteron faus. Ephantes pot Chryseas, hameras blepharon. Dircaion hyper, chret throne molusa. Don leo kas pinargolikon. Fouta panta pansagiyay. Figata protro monoxiteroi. Kinei sasa halinoi. Homeric hymn to Pythian Apollo sings how Leto's son goes to rocky Pytho, playing upon his lyre. Then immediately the undying gods think only of the lyre and song, and all the muses sing together. Homeric hymn to Pythian Apollo. Eisi deformit soletus requiris huios, forming gigatirei prospito petreis non. Ambrota heimate conta lumina toia deformix, cruce hippop lake trucana heina heimereis Autika dathana toisimale kitariska evoide. Musai men hamapasai me pomenai oikale. Himne usintra te yondoram brotei anthropon. Klemos in nasmas en hontes i patana toisi peioisi. The opening lines to Homer's Iliad, the epic about the Trojan War. Sing wrath, goddess, the wrath of Achilles, son of Peleus, that destructive wrath which brought countless woes upon the Achaeans and sent forth to Hades many valiant souls of heroes. Sing wrath, goddess. The main character of the Iliad is Achilles, son of the powerful sea goddess Thetis. In this rather startling excerpt from Book 1 of Iliad, Achilles, bursting into tears, drew apart from friends and sat down on the shore of the Gray Sea. Earnestly, he prayed to his dear mother with outstretched hands weeping, and his lady mother heard him, and she came out from the sea, stroked him with her hand and asked, "Child, why do you weep?" Thetis and Achilles. Kristus hetaron avarheits et nos filias teis, thine phalos polieis, oron paperon aponton, pola Demetri filei, e reis antocheras o regnis. Så det dagre heion, du daglige botnia meiter, heimen en ben felsin, halos para Patrick rondir, Carpalimos Tanitypolis, halos eto mikle, Kai reparoi datu yukatet se tutapro hiontos. Ferite min katerexene pos, te fatektono matse. Teknon Did Sephonas hikitapentos teknon Odysseus's crew members heard the goddess Kirke singing. She welcomed them into her home, offering food and drink. Then she waved her wand and turned them into beasts. She reassures Odysseus, however. Why, Odysseus, thus do you sit mute, not touching food or drink? You need not fear, for already have I sworn a mighty oath. But who knows how she really feels? Kirke, enchanting. Devtutos Odyssey Katarexia Isos Anaudoi Monedon Romis tu Abdei Ude The earliest complete lyric song with musical notations is the Song of Sikilos, inscribed 3rd century CE. It also bore the epitaph, "I am a stone icon. Sikilos placed me here, a mark of immortal remembrance throughout time." The following English translation by Armand Dangour replicates the rhythm and rhyme scheme of the Greek. While you live, shine bright. Don't let anything you benight. We don't have life for long, my friend. To all our plans time decrease and end. Song of Sikilos. And that concludes the performance. I now turn to our panel, beginning with Armand Dangour. Armand teaches classics at Oxford University and has researched for many years into ancient Greek music.
Thank you very much. So first, thank you, Lana and Bettina. Congratulations, Bettina, on your interpretations and your very accomplished singing and performance on the lyre under these challenging conditions of singing to an unseen audience. I'm starting off a discussion then with friends and colleagues who will be saying something in 5 minutes or less about their thoughts about and understanding of ancient Greek music from different perspectives. Some are academics and researchers, others like Nikos are creative practitioners. So my own approach as a researcher is to try to understand what the ancient documents and discussions tell us about how the music may actually have sounded. We have around 60 documents of notated music that survive from the classical period down to late antiquity. As Bettina mentioned, the only piece that she sang that derives from one of those documents was the final one, the short song of Sikilos, which was inscribed on a column, perhaps around 200 CE. All the other music was new music, Bettina's own creative reinterpretation of passages of ancient text. As you will have heard, I think the idiom of the Sikilos song is not entirely familiar to us, perhaps less so than the other pieces, given that it begins on one note, what we would call the tonic of the scale, and ends on a fourth below that, the dominant. Now, those who attempt to compose new music set to ancient texts have some possible guides. One is that we know something about how ancient Greek words were pronounced at different times. And we know it differed from classical times to Roman imperial times, when it began to sound a bit more like modern Greek. Another factor to take into account is that we have a detailed understanding of the rhythms used in Greek poetry. And again, congratulations to Bettina, who has bugged me for some time to try and explain how some of these rhythms actually work. You could have heard the dactyls in, for example, her performance of the Homer. A third is that ancient theorists tell us very precisely about the melodic and harmonic nature of the music, and it's very different from modern style. And a fourth is that we can now replicate ancient instruments, in particular the wind instrument, the double pipes or aulos, with some precision, and hear how they may have sounded, work out how they would have been played. Of course, it's entirely the choice of a modern creative practitioner, musician, how far to be guided by such constraints. It's quite likely that if we were to be beamed back to ancient Greece at any period, the music would sound quite strange to our ears and not as appealing as Bettina's songs, which use modern sounding tunings and harmonies and gentle singing style. The microtones used in the earliest music might even make us suppose that people sang and played out of tune. But if you think of listening to, say, Arabic or Balinese song, you'll immediately realize that a different musical idiom operates. And if you listen to sung folk traditions even today in Serbia or Albania, for example, you will know that the vocal style can sound very different from that of Western singing, and that the emotion is generated in quite different ways from those that we're used to. So one of the aspects that I haven't mentioned, which is much harder to grasp, is that there was dance that accompanied so many ancient Greek performances. I believe that the next speaker will say something about this. So I'm delighted to pass on now and to introduce my friend, Dr. Maria Xanthou, who is Visiting Fellow 2020 at the Seeger Center of Hellenic Studies and a Research Associate in Pindaric Studies at Harvard CHS. So Maria, your turn.
Maria, unmute your microphone, please.
Yes, can you hear me now? Okay, great, thank you. Thank you very much, Armand. Thank you everyone participating in this event. And I would also like to thank Bettina for organizing this and the CHS for offering his auspices and for organizing, for making this possible. Today I'll be offering my 5 minutes to what has been called the Kybdilon Sun, Pindar second dithyramb orality and choral performance. First of all, I would like to start with a question about what connects Oulipo with Pindar and ancient literary theory of the composition of a note, especially a dithyramb. I will attempt to answer the question about Oulipo and offer you some background knowledge that Oulipo is an abbreviation for Ouvroir de Littérature Potentielle, which may be translated as a workshop of potential literature as a group of French-speaking authors and mathematicians experimenting in constrained writing techniques. The group was founded in 1960 by Raymond Quinault and François de Lyonnais. Novelists like Georges Perec and Italo Calvino, poets like Oscar Pastior and Jean Lescure and Jacques Rubot were included among its notable members. But what were these constraints? One technique was what was called lipogram, which is a writing that excludes one or more letters. Another technique was univocalism, a poem using only one vowel letter. The other technique was S plus 7, sometimes called noun N plus 7, which means that the replacement of every noun in a text with the seventh noun after it in a dictionary or in a lexicon. Another technique were the palindromes, like words or phrases or whole sentences, which may be read the same backward and forward. Like, for example, the famous phrase that we read when we go to Hagia Sophia, like nipson anomemata mi monan opsen. Now I would like to focus on the first 3 verses of Pindar's second dithyramb, which were cited by 3 ancient authors like Athenaeus, Heraclides Ponticus, and Clearchus from Sole. And I would like to kindly ask Lana, if possible, to allow me to share.
You can share.
Yes. Okay. So, sorry. So I would like us to read what has been what Athenaeus writes about the second dithyramb. And here I offer you the translation. Regarding the poem composed without the letter sigma, the same Clearchus of Sole said that Pindar wrote the following, a kind of riddle put in lyric poetry, since many had criticized him for not avoiding the use of the letter sigma, and they disapproved of it. In the past, one should take note of this in response to those who rejected the astigmatic ode of Lassus of Hermione entitled Centaurs. Also, the hymn to Demeter of Hermione, written by Lassus, contains no sigma. And then he offers the three first lines of Pindar's second dithyramb. I will read the Greek text. Prin men herpes hinotenia taidoa Dithyrambon, kai to san kibdelon anthropos in apostomaton. In the past, the song of dithyrambs came forth, stretched like a measuring line, and the sun came falsely from the mouths of men, but new have been thrown open, etc., etc. I will just stop sharing my screen now. Now, these verses offer us one of the most important pieces of information regarding the formation of dithyramb as a literary genre through the phrase to san kibdelon, which attracted ancient and modern classical scholars' attention. I won't go into details about how August Burke and Ludolf Thyssen attempted to decipher the meaning of the term sun in comparison to the term sigma. At this point, I would like to remind us of W.B. Stanford's observation that the Greek attitude, and I quote, to literature was more like our attitude to music than our attitude to the printed page. According to Athenaeus, the peripatetic philosopher Aristoxenus of Tarentum, who also had the nickname Musikos, suggested that some archaic anonymous composers of music rejected the sigma sound as it was difficult to pronounce or inappropriate for the musical instrument of aulos. Moving on to modern classical scholarship, Michalis Kopidakis, a former academic instructor of mine at my alma mater, Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, in his 1991 article, The Kibdelon Sun in the Gospel of Lucas, 22, 31 to 32, tried to pinpoint parallels between the use of S sound in the Gospel of Lucas and the books in the Old Testament, referring also to the views of modern poets, literary critics like Robert Graves, George Seferis, and Joseph Van Hebel. The next stop to this fascinating trip à la recherche des perdus is the article by Armand Dangour, How the Dithyramb got its shape. Dangour attributes the ancient poets and literary critics' preoccupation towards the limitation or reduction of the impact of the sibilant sound to the trained and discriminating oral sensitivity, which was likely to follow from the essentially oral nature of Greek culture at this period. And I hope Milman Parry and Albert Lord, the Dioscoroi of Homeric orality, to note from where they are. Dangour interprets Lassus Hermioneus' purpose of astigmatic composition as an attempt to harness the uncoordinated enunciation of the S sound. Harnessing or manipulating sibilants was included in musicians' agenda like Sakadas and Auletes from Argos, who was 3 times successful at the Pythian festival since its instigation in 586 BCE. However, Dangour rightly insists that Lassus's preoccupation with how to manipulate sibilants probably arose from his concern to evoke Ophidian and thus Apollonian associations as a consequence of adequate and sophisticated choral direction. I will not discuss Salvatore Lavecchia's and James Portes' views on the same passage due to time restrictions. As a conclusion, I would like to prompt you to think how music and logos are entangled in the composition of ancient Greek poetry and music. Moreover, I would like us to think of a view suggested by Greg Nash in his monograph, Pindar's Homer, The Lyric Possession of an Epic Past, how much the staging of musical contests at the major Pan-Hellenic festivals affected not only the poetic composition and production, but created and informed and increased awareness both from the part of the audience and the poet, which resulted to a highly sophisticated attention to the composition of instrumental and choral music. The staging of a musical event, like an Epinician song or a dithyramb, required the enhanced attention to music, pronunciation, and bodily movement. All these acoustic experiments, the choral and metrical innovations, and the linguistic manipulations brought together and grounded to the Greek folk music, gradually evolved into the literary genres that Pindar had composed and resulted in what has been called the omnivorous literary genre, alias known as the Attic tragedy. And now I would like to introduce you Professor Angelo Mariani. Professor Angelo Mariani is Associate Professor of Greek Literature at the University of Salerno in Italy, where he also gives courses on ancient Greek music.
I have to unmute. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Bettina, for invitation, and Lana for organization. Let me share my screen. Among the perceptual experiences that human beings are capable of, that of sound and music is probably the most difficult to express in words. Notwithstanding, a great many of people in ancient Greece must have been talking about music very often and at different levels. In fact, as the experience of musicae in its diverse manifestations was ubiquitous in everyday life of the individuals, even those not particularly cultivated, we can imagine that it was also a topic of conversation. Moreover, as musical practice was one of the most important disciplines of the paideia, the knowledge of some of its technical aspects had to be fairly common, at least among the social and cultural elites. Therefore, for the musicae, as for any other practical disciplines, techne, an appropriate and functional language must have been used from the beginning, which allowed experts and professionals to understand to each other, teachers to pass their knowledge on, and students to learn the principles and techniques of instrumental and or vocal practice. In a passage of the Plato's Protagoras, Socrates says that one of the most important abilities of a music teacher, kitharistes, should be that of making people highly skillful, deinos, at talking, legein, about what he is an expert in, epistemon, i.e. the art of playing kithara, kitharesis. In this view, it is worth considering the numerous scenes of musical paideia pictured on pottery with teachers and students in action. Though these images should not be taken as photographs, the special care in depicting some details of the instrumental and vocal practice seem to indicate that even the painters must have known well the objects and situations they represented. On a famous red figure Kilix, Duris portrayed a kitharistes who during a lesson has just stopped strumming on his instrument, as we can easily infer from the position of the plectrum in his right hand, and is talking to his student sitting in front of him. In all likelihood, he is giving advice on the sonorous effect produced by the particular way of striking a string, keeping it at the same time in a sort of pinch between the thumb and the forefinger in the left hand, while the boy is trying to reproduce the gesture on his own instrument. A specific term must have existed for this procedure. Pottery gives us a rich visual evidence of other technical gesture for tuning stringed instruments, for example, for plucking the strings, for damping strings after strumming, and so on. And we can reliably assume that special terms existed to designate each of them. In addition, during the 5th and 4th century BCE in Athens, a number of professional musicians named chorodidaskaloi were assigned to prepare and conduct the musical performances within the dramatic festivals. Even though the chorus members were not professionals and the songs that they were due to learn normally by imitation must have been not very complicated, the chorodidaskaloi must have used a sort of special, if not strictly technical language in order to communicate with them. The other practitioners active in multifaceted musical life of the polis, rhapsode, lyric poets, playwrights, singers and instrumentalists active during the symposia, must have received a more or less formal musical education in professional training, but also judges of the theatrical performances, the dikastai, must have gained a musical contents of some sort during their educational curriculum, and at a certain extent, a domain of the relevant technical language, although this kind of ability was probably not the criterion that determined the choice of them in the role. Furthermore, it is well known that musicae was also a matter of culture debate, so that we can reasonably conclude that its vocabulary to some extent belonged to the everyday language, at least among the social and cultural elites. In this field, the boundaries between ordinary and technical vocabularies were less clear-cut than we would be led to believe. Before the origin and development of the scientific prose, Greek poetry gives numerous descriptions of the multimedia and interactive experience of musicae in poetry, focused quite exclusively on the wide and profound sensory and emotional involvement of the people attending the performances. In general, nouns, verbs, and adjectives of wide semantic power were employed to describe the multiplicity of auditory, visual, and even tactile stimuli that musicae induced into the listeners. It was from this rich lexical material that a specifically musical vocabulary developed. It is the most effective tool to elaborate a music theory proper. It is no coincidence that the first author of a treatise dedicated to music, also in its theoretical aspects, was a poet and a musician, Lasus of Hermione. Unfortunately, of his text, we know only the title and very few fragments of problematic interpretation. We also know that within the school of Aristotle, a great interest developed for speculation on music, and that his pupil and successor Theophrastus of Eresus was the same town of Sappho, wrote several works on music, dealing with it from different points of view. Unfortunately, even of these texts, we are left with a handful of fragments, although extremely interesting. But it is by another student of Aristotle, Aristoxenus of Tarentum, that tradition has given us a much considerable text on one of the most important branches of ancient music theory, the harmonicae, which concerned the structure and analysis of scales and the rules according to which melodies were to be composed. Before becoming a pupil of Aristotle, Aristoxenus had learned the principles of Pythagorean philosophy, and his approach to the discipline seeks to combine the two tendencies. Other theoretical writings arrived in the West thanks to a famous manuscript, now preserved in Venice, which also hands down some of the most known melodies of ancient Greece. A special place among these writings is the De Musica, attributed to Plutarch, a text that between the 15th and 16th centuries aroused a great interest, mainly in Italy, among humanists and musicians who were looking for new musical languages. The text was widely circulated thanks to its translation into Latin by the Brescian humanist Carlo Valguglio in 1507. Here I reproduce some pictures of the first printed edition of this translation. He also wrote an introduction, this one, to the work based on his reading of other Greek authors on music, especially Porphyry of Tyre, who wrote an important commentary on the harmonica of Claudius Ptolemy. Both the translation and the proemium, the proemium is this and the translation is that, were studied in depth by Vincenzo Galilei, who in turn translated them into Italian. These are the papers preserved in Firenze, Biblioteca Nazionale, and this is presumably his hand, who in turn translated into Italian and circulated their contents within the Florentine Camerata. In his famous Dialogo della musica antica et della moderna, published in Florence in 1581, he was the first to publish some of the pieces handed to us from a distant past. This is the Italian quotation of un gentiluomo nostro fiorentino, one gentleman of Florence, who at that time was working in Rome, and Vincenzo Galilei asked him to find as many texts, as many Greek texts about music as he can, and to send him by letters, copies, and so on. It is only a small example of how ancient music has sounded to the modern, and as we hope it will continue to do in the future. Thank you. And it is a pleasure now to pass the turn to Andromachi Karanika, who is Associate Professor and Chair of Classics at University of California at Irvine and works on gender and poetics. Please, Maki.
Thank you very much to everyone. I'll try to share a screen. I think, Angelo, you need to stop sharing yours so I can. Okay.
Yes, I've stopped.
Oh, excellent. I'm sorry about this.
Okay.
Okay. Just give me 1 second. Okay. I have a bride who is wearing her mask, as you see here. Now, the crying out of Hymenaios becomes the type of invocation that blends the address to the divine and the hymn for it, as a name is duplicitous for a divine figure and the ubiquitous genre of performance in his honor. In classical times, we have a wealth of information about the wedding ritual, primarily as it is depicted in vase iconography. All stages of what would typically be a 3-day event were depicted in different scenes. The figure of the bride is central in many of these, often even showing different aspects of preparation and thus different temporal tableaus that followed one after the other, possibly repeating itself with the central figure there. In those wedding scenes, vases are often depicted as a token of transactions or objects of ritual. But in the wedding scenes in particular, though, objects interact with the human figures in intricate ways. They seem to be beyond simple containers, but act as a steering part of the ritual and a locus for the viewer's attention who watches the vase painting. in what I consider functioning in similar ways. Let's see if I can make this happen. Excuse me.
Andromache, I'm actually sharing because yours
Oh,
didn't come
excellent.
up.
Thank you.
Yours
Excellent.
didn't come up, so I'm filling
That's
in.
fine.
So
That's fine.
just
Perfect.
cue
Thank
me.
you so much.
No
Yes.
worries.
In what I consider functioning in very similar ways, ancient literature uses and reflects the wedding song tradition in different ways. That there was a Hymenaio song labeled as such that we know already from different archaic sources. Now, since much of the research in ancient music and oral traditions come from a kind of a methodology that looks at both literary and archaeological records, I would like us very briefly to see this emphasis on what I call the meta level, namely how different aspects of certain performances, including the role that objects like vases played, and the performance of songs with their labels, are not simply repeated all the time, but they become a point of reference. The invocation Hymen or Hymenaia, maybe we can go to the next slide, appear on stage, both tragic and comic. Cassandra in Euripides' Trojan Women invokes Hymenaios in a twisted wedding song. The end of Aristophanes' piece also brings the same invocation and a remnant of what would have actually been sung at weddings. That's the next slide. The tragic case, a solo performance coming from the actor playing the doomed heroine, whereas the second ends Trageus' quest for peace on a happy note with a collective song and dance. That this was a very popular genre, I think, is beyond any doubt. These distinctive use in different genres hinges on how it is presented as solo or a choir, the first twisted, the second bride and married. Just like the lutrophoros, the wedding vase par excellence, a type of vase which can be used for a funerary context or a wedding context. The song and the invocation to Hymenaios lends itself for shifting contexts in ways that ancient poets knew too well to play with. Poetic genres had their own hidden rules as we try to reconstruct them. Now, in an important Lutrophoros hydria, one of the early black figured vases from the 6th century, which depicts a lutrophoria. Unfortunately, it's not the one I'm showing right now. But if we can go back to the previous slide again, we have the word Hymenaios inscribed as a testament that this is a vase and a vessel time found in the sanctuary of the Nymphe, which was very close to the Acropolis slope. If we can have a quick look at what, as Maria said very nicely earlier, there is no sigma in here. We have the Hymenaie. So again, this is an inscription on an early vase. So in the same way, one addresses in other types of popular performances, say, for example, the lullabies, where you invoke the sleep, hypnos, and say, oh, hypnos, come and get the child. Hymenaios also needs to be understood as emerging from a kind of context which can function in weirdly similar terms. It is an underscoring of the situation at hand, namely the wedding context in which the wedding divinity, so to speak, is invoked like the charming lumber invoked for a child. Unlike a lullaby, though, this is supposed to be a very vibrant song with a refrain possibly known, registered, and circulating in ancient audiences, and thus we see its many different sort of transmutations here. We know that it is vibrant. We know that the reference to the Hymenaios in Iliad 18, we have the verb polus Hymenaios aurore. It had a reason, which also shows how it increases in sound, volume, and numbers of people participating in it. I will stop here, and I hope we'll have food for more thought. And then we'll move to the inimitable Nikos Xanthoulis, a composer, research associate with the Academy of Athens, and an amazing ancient Greek lyre soloist. Nick.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Harvard University and to Bettina for having invited me to this marvelous panel. My relationship with Bettina began with a professional collaboration. She undertook the hard task of editing the English texts of my ancient Greek lyre method. Her deep knowledge of the ancient Greek language, combined with an extraordinary musicality, was crucial for the method. We continued our collaboration playing together in concerts and recordings. A CD will be soon released featuring Bettina's marvelous interpretations of my Antigone's choruses, with me accompanying her on the lyre. Now it's time to clarify that I am a musician and not a philologist. I served as principal trumpet player at the Greek National Opera for 25 years. However, having a satisfactory knowledge of the ancient Greek language, I approached the ancient Greek music both practically and theoretically. In the beginning, I played the ancient Greek salpings, composed a concerto for salpings and string orchestra, and presented it in 2012 in Salerno, thanks to my dear friend Angelo Meriani. After that, I decided to work on the lyre, having in mind that this was the national instrument of the Greek antiquity. I studied thousands of lyre depictions from the pottery and other representations of the lyre from reliefs and sculptures, noting 100% consistency. With the word consistency, I mean repetitive representations of stances, postures of hands and fingers. I tried to build a firm technique through an everyday practice routine, having walked the analogous path with my trumpet. The magic of the lyre was being unveiled, although many times I felt like reaching a dead end of no way to beyond. But the instruments have no end, whereas the musicians do have. I composed a lot of incidental music for tragedies. I felt many times the eerie atmosphere of the ancient theaters. Please let me describe you just one moment of my work. August 16 of 2004, and the theater of Epidaurus is full with 12,000 people. Absolute darkness, and I am alone in the center of the orchestra with a tympanon. I see over the edge of the theater the moon rising, and I am happy. My music on Eumenides will be played in this temple of the humanity. I continue to work on the lyre many hours per day. I have the dream to bring the technique of the 7-string lyre on the same level as any other Western instrument, trying to speak with my instrument to every man using the world language of music. I continue also to compose music for Horika of the ancient Greek drama, discovering every time new marvelous things. Could you imagine the challenge of a composer to attribute the style of each Horikon through the moral of a different mode? A manic chorus for Dionysus with composite Greek rhythms and Phrygian harmony, a solemn dactylic pace of a hymn to Zeus on Dorian harmony, or a soothing song to Apollo in Aeolian harmony. In Greece, we have two extremely important luthiers that make ancient Greek instruments, one in Athens and one in Thessaloniki. I'm lucky enough to use instruments from both of them. Given the fact that Luthieros, Sikilos, Thodoris Koumardzis from Thessaloniki will present their work in a few minutes, I'll end my presentation with a small piece on my 7-string lyre built by the great luthier Nicholas Brass. Yeah, that is what I played, just to show the possibilities of the lyre and that there is no limit on the instruments. So when Sylvain will speak about the Delphic hymns, I can say that now on the 7-string lyre, I can play all the chromatic tones, and it is possible. I now turn to Sylvain. Sylvain is a junior researcher at the CNRS in Strasbourg, France, and he devotes his research to ancient Greek music and soundscapes, especially in Delphi, and to their reception in modern times. Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear Nikos, for the introduction and of course for the wonderful performance. And thank you, my warmest thanks to Bettina and Lana for organizing everything. So for this panel of the Delphic Festival preview, I would like to talk briefly about the discovery of the first Delphic hymn to Apollo. Just a moment to share the screen. So the first Delphic hymn to Apollo, a paean, was engraved with its musical notation on marble slabs. The so-called Great Excavation of Delphi started in 1892. In the first semester of 1893, French archaeologists began to excavate the area, which was later identified as the Athenian treasury, as we can see on old photographs, which illustrate different stages of the ongoing works. So at the very beginning, and then you can see the treasury. The first fragments of the musical inscription were found on the 5th of June, 1893, as recorded by the excavation diary. The blocks actually belong to the south wall of the Athenian treasury, which was reconstructed in 1905. The hymns were cut off and are now on display in the Museum of Delphi. As recorded by a series of inscriptions, Athenian Dionysiac artists, that's the name of the corporation, organized between 138 and 96 BC 4 big processions to Delphi, called Pythais, which was made of many officials and musicians, singers as well as instrument players, Kythara and Aulos. It was the occasion for Athens to manifest its power and its glory in pride, pomp, and circumstance. There is discussion among scholars to decide whether the first hymn was performed in 138 BC or 128 BC. I personally agree with the hypothesis of 128 BC with arguments I have no time to expose here. An inscription gives the name of all the participants to the Pithais of 128 BC, officials, a chorus of 40 singers to perform the paean, and other artists to compete in musical and theatrical performances. It is very plausible that the instrument players also took part to the performance of the paean. Since it is the almost only example of ritual music discovered where it had been actually performed, I would like to point out that a performance takes place in a certain space, and it is important to try to figure out where the artists performed the hymns. Recent scholarship has focused on the walkways within the boundaries of the sanctuary and has shown that the place which used to be considered as the aula, the place where Apollo was supposed to have murdered Pytho, is actually the agora of Delphi, here. The aula should be located in the west of the sanctuary. According to that, we can think of two main possibilities. Either the procession walks from the southwestern gate up to the great altar through the agora, where there are two main Athenian buildings, the Athenian treasury and the Athenian store, portico, or artists gathered along the western stoa to enter the sanctuary through the western gate to the terrace of the temple. This is my favorite hypothesis. Here is how it may have looked like, with 5 officials, a dozen of musicians, and 40 singers. That's for the very first performance. Back to the future. While Henri Weil edited the text, Theodore Renac studied the musical notation and transposed it into a modern score. To advertise this discovery, Théophile Homol, the director of the French school at Athens, decided to organize a performance of the hymn at the French school at Athens, still located on the south slope of the Lykavitos hill. So, the premiere of the hymn took place on March 29th, 1894, in the main room of the library, as reported in different media. The audience was made of the highest authorities of the Hellenic kingdom, the King George I and the royal family. The French government was represented by the French diplomatic corps, the admiral, and the officers of the French Navy stationed in the Oriental Middle Sea, whose band was playing outdoors to welcome visitors. Then there were ministers, politicians, scholars, and the elite of the Athenian society, more than 200 persons in the hall, which was covered with Greek and French flags. The hymn was performed in the arrangement of Louis Nicole, who was playing piano, by 4 Greek singers. This event was a huge success. Then, the first Delphic hymn came to Paris. April 12th, Theodore Renac read a paper on the hymn for the members of the Études Grecques in the amphitheater of the École des Beaux-Arts, and the paper was followed by the performance of the hymn by the soloist Jeanne Remacle in the arrangement of Gabriel Fauré. To conclude, I just want to mention a significant performance which took place on June the 16th, 1894, at the Sorbonne University, but for a very different audience. It was scheduled by Pierre de Coubertin during the Congress that was about to create the modern Olympic Games. Coubertin reports that the delegates were enthusiastic after the performance. This was the starting point of an incredible diffusion of this ancient Greek melody, but this is another story. Thank you for listening. And now this is my pleasure to give the floor to Theodoros Koumartzis from Thessaloniki.
Good evening. My name is Theodoros Koumartzis, and I would like to welcome you at Sikilo. Sikilo is a private museum, interactive museum of music instruments here in Thessaloniki. And everything, it's actually started at a very small village named Evropos, around 50 kilometers in the north of Thessaloniki, where a family-based business named Luthier Music Instruments started to collaborate with Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and the Hellenic University of Greece. We have actually used any kind of references we have from antiquity, direct or indirect. We have also, with a collaboration with the university, we have found references regarding the materials that were used during antiquity to make these music instruments. But also at the same time, we try to approach the reconstruction of such an instrument in a way that a musician would like to. We have the chance to collaborate with great musicians like Ross Daly, Nikos Xanthoulis, of which you listened before, but also many other musicians such as Bettina de Guzman, Rui Fu, Yerko Lorca, who had actually collaborated with us and worked with us in order to promote our culture. So welcome to Sikilos. We're going to make a very small and brief tour to just take a little bit of what is all Sikilo about. As the majority of you might already know, Apollo, the god of music, became the god of music when his brother Hermes, according to ancient Greek mythology, gave him the first music instrument. As you can see, sometimes we have text references like the Homeric theme to Hermes, that is in ancient Greek and in English, where he actually literally used a turtle shell to make the first lyre that was named Helis. As you can imagine, we have never harmed any kind of actual animal. This is because we try to combine our knowledge with modern technology such as 3D prototyping. So what we do is we actually scan a real turtle shell in order to be able to reconstruct a music instrument that can actually achieve the kind of quality that a modern musician needs. But this is just a first step of what we did, because the feedback of the musician was something really, really important for us. As you might know, there's actually a huge gap regarding this particular music instrument in history. So what we're trying to do here is, on one hand, to study what is left from antiquity, and on the other hand, inspire more musicians to talk and to compose, to write new music for people that are actually affected from that right now. Having said that, we have actually made a guitar, a constructed guitar of the Golden Age that was presented by Mr. Peter Pringle, a Canadian musician, when we actually made our approach regarding the tremolo and the vibrato system of the system. Even though we do know that academically this is not proven, we used the same materials in order to be able to reconstruct an instrument that can actually help to make a that can actually help us to make tremolo or vibrato. Having said that, I would like to also analyze a little bit the lyreacademy.com. It's actually the first online platform where someone can actually learn how to play the lyre, both ancient melodies but also new. And of course, the book of Nikos Xanthoulis, the first complete melody to learn how to play the ancient Greek lyre. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much, Bettina, and of course, the Harvard University for being here today. So I would like to invite Mr. Greg Nagy to continue, the professor of the Harvard. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Theodore. And thank you all for enlightening me in so many new ways. I've learned so much, and now my problem is how to say all the things that I have learned from you in 5 minutes. I think I might need just 1 or 2 minutes more to do justice to the amazing presentations we have seen. And I propose that I go in reverse order so that by the time I'm done in 5+ minutes from now, I return to the genial organizer of our event, our dear Bettina. I'm so happy to make new friends and to reconnect with friends of long standing. And so let me start with my new friend, Theodoros, who I think when he shows us these beautiful reconstructions of the ancient instruments, makes me think of how important it is, and he showed it, how important it is to have the skill of a musician in projecting sound. May I reminisce about a moment where I was in Athens and I was at that magnificent auditorium, the Megaro, and there was a big bouzouki, shall we say, demonstration. And I couldn't believe it. There were 3 bouzouki players, and the 2 at the side were playing electric bouzoukia, whereas the middle one had no electrical cord, whatever. And guess what? He overwhelmed the whole audience. The middleman who had no electric bouzouki overwhelmed not only the other players, but overwhelmed the audience. And similarly, dear Theodoros, I am overwhelmed by you and by your wonderful project of helping us bring ancient music to life again. So my compliments and my admiration. And then as I turn to another friend, Sylvain, could I just say that the way you presented the visuals for the premiere of the Delphic hymns as you reconstructed it was so overwhelming again for me, because suddenly I could imagine what I had been unable to imagine before, and what it must have been for music to be brought to life by a choros that is simultaneously singing and dancing. And what a miracle it is that some of the reenactors already back in the 19th century included people like Gustave Fauré. Again, I am overwhelmed. Could I also say about the hymns themselves, and this is a way for me to come to the next speaker, my friend Nikos. It amazes me how what modernity sometimes calls musical accompaniment is really so central to the core of performance that it is really misleading to say that the human voice, and for that matter, the motion of the human body, somehow has to take precedence over what, again, in modernity is sometimes called accompaniment. I've worried about this enough to convince myself that musical accompaniment shouldn't even be called accompaniment, because there is such a level playing field of the organic structuring of the human voice, the human body, and musical instruments. And could I say, dear Nikomu, that the way you brought the instrument to life just by playing a few strains made me think, wow, a musical instrument is as capable of mimesis, as Anglo-classicists pronounce it, or mimesis, as our Greek friends pronounce it, reenactment. Mimesis, I don't just mean imitation, I mean reenactment of a living moment. And how, if I understood you correctly, you were saying that if you play it right, the musical instrument can reenact anything, which is what I was ready to say up to this point. a chorus could do. By chorus, a choros, I mean a singing and dancing ensemble, which for me is more capable of mimesis reenactment even than a soloist. But now I must say, I have to factor in, having heard you, the instrumentalist, bringing the song to life. And now I turn to a friend of long standing, my dear friend, Andromachi, with whom I've had over the years so many stimulating conversations. And whenever Andromachi speaks, I learn something new. And the same goes for today. I must say, the hymeneal performance, the way you presented it for us today, dear Machi, just convinces me, if you don't mind my putting my hat on as a linguist, that there must be a relationship between the word humane, the word hymnos, and for that matter, the word huphino, to weave. And if you will allow me, I'm inspired by the few minutes that you had with us to return to Odyssey 8, to Rhapsody 8 of the Odyssey, which is the only time in the Odyssey that the word hymnos is actually attested. And it has to do with the continuity of a stylized festival. And as far as I can see, the hymnos is the continuity. It's usually thought, if we read only the Homeric hymns, that the hymn is the beginning of something. Well, yes, it's the beginning of something, but if you make that beginning perfect, that means that the beginning becomes the middle and becomes the ending as well. May I use a very trivial metaphor here, but I can't help myself. It's when an airplane takes off. If you have a perfect takeoff, then you have a perfect flight and you have a perfect landing. And that's what you showed us. And for me, a hymeneal is the perfect beginning of a relationship. And I can't resist that wonderful wish that speakers of Greek will say to a newly married couple, which is kala stephana, beautiful garlands, by which I think is meant, if you start the weaving of a garland right, it'll be a beautiful life for keeps, forever. In a cyclical way, for me, forever is always circular, not linear, of course. Which brings me now to Angelo. Angelo, how much I admire you. I must say, the way you talk about not just the performance of music, but the organization of music, and how through all of your adventures, so to speak, with the musical world, you went from wind instrument to string instrument and back. And to me, the way you talked about the trumpet so inspired me. I was just the other day reading Pausanias. I was minding my own business. And I find that the translations of Pausanias tend to be a little too literal-minded. For example, there's a tendency to think that epithets of gods and goddesses are whimsical. That's very British, maybe, very Lewis Carroll. But in one translation of Pausanias, when Pausanias is visiting the city-state of Argos, he's saying, unlike elsewhere, the goddess Athena has a special epithet. And then in the English translations, it just says trumpet. And wow, that doesn't, I hate to tell you, but in English, you can't help but think of strumpet or something. So, I've got to block that. What does this mean, that Athena is a trumpet? Well, of course, she's the embodiment of the Salpinks in the life of Argive warriors, because Pausanias also tells us when the Argive warriors go to war, the musical accompaniment for their battle formation and their engagement in battle is the Salpinks. Unlike, for example, the Spartans, where, as most other places, the musical accompaniment for their facing death is the avlos, the double reed. So may I say, dear Angelo, that in a sense, you've become for me the embodiment of music. I am just thrilled to hear you. And now I come to another dear friend of long-standing, Maria. I loved what you said about the euphony, so to speak, of avoiding the sun, the S. And you know what it made me think of? How, yes, when Greek poetics and song making wants to sound beautiful, it tries to avoid the S, just as when French singers sing, and you have the letter R as we pronounce it in English, the R gracieux in French. In French opera, you can't do an R gracieux, you have to trill the R. So I love the limitations, the parameters of making sound, but then there's also the aesthetics of imitating, shall we say, unpleasant sounds. And dear Maria, you inspired me to think of that moment in the Medea of Euripides, where Medea is so red hot angry. And she literally, may I put it this way, hisses at her soon-to-be ex-husband by saying, I saved you. And in Greek, esosase, esosase. She is hissing the words, I rescued you and look what you've done. So I could go on, but may I do just one more quick anecdote? A friend of mine, David Packard, once did a statistical analysis of euphonic effects in the Homeric Iliad. And he was trying to see what kinds of sounds that are considered the most euphonic in ancient theory, where are they clustered more than anywhere else? And you know what he came up with? This was actually published in the Transactions of the American Philological Association. It's where Nestor is trying to reconcile the warring Agamemnon and Achilles back to each other, and he uses me lichi ois epesi. He uses sweet words, and when the words actually come alive, they are, according to ancient theory of euphonics, the most euphonic of all sounds anywhere, and they're all bunched together in the Iliad. Well, I could go on, but as always, dear Maria, you so engage me, and thank you again for giving me something new to think about. And then we're coming to the pinnacle, but this is a very difficult one because for me, Armand is, shall we say, the Mount Everest of studies of ancient music. I am just so impressed, dear Armand, with how you have so patiently, with such good philology, but also such musicianship, reconstructed these amazing pieces of ancient Greek music that that are so hard to come by, and where the reconstruction is maybe not, how shall I say it, not accompanied by good musicianship, where we're often left in the dark. Well, you bring me to light every time I listen to your reconstructions and try to wrap my mind around it. So I think with that in view, I now go to a piece of compliment interrupting Armand that extends directly to our fearless organizer, my dear new friend Bettina, whom I so respect and admire for not only your intelligence and your artistry, but also your spiritual strength in your dedication to the study and the realization of ancient music. I keep thinking that when it comes to reconstructions, you're a master of that, as you showed with your demonstration of how the Seculos hymn would have sounded like. But then when we don't have evidence for what it would have sounded like, I so admire the way you you managed to give that perfect interpretation. And I like the way you and Armand, and here I loop back to Armand, use the word interpretation. You know, it's a funny thing about the English language, which is my second language. My first language is Hungarian, so I still have a sense of wonder about some of the things that English can do. But as I think back about the title of a book that my mentor, Albert Lord, produced back in 1960, The Singer of Tales. I love the way in the English language, the verb sing and the noun singer are automatically performative. So that if I can put it another way, if you say sing or singer in English, that already comes with the requirement of performance. Without performance, there is no song, there is no singing. And I say that because isn't it almost amusing that in French, for example, as I understand it, only in the academic world can people say performance. Sure, the English language performance comes from French, but it's Old French. And so what do people who speak French have to say now when they sit down at the piano and play a nocturne by Chopin? It's not that I will perform Chopin, I will interpret Chopin. But isn't interpretation really the bravery that comes with truly bringing music to life? And to me, Bettina, you're a paragon of that ideal. And I offer you a garland for that, a garland of victory. And that's it for me. I think at this point, our organizer should have the last say. It's not my right to insist on this, but as the oldest person here, why don't I insist? Bettina, you have to have the last word.
I am without words after you, Greg, the way you honored us all. And so if nobody has any objections, I think we should just simply let it end here so beautifully.
Well, but if we disappear from, as I like to call it jokingly, Hollywood Squares, some people who are fundamentalists might think we have all experienced rapture. But in a way, when we disappear, we will be in a state of rapture, thanks to this beautiful event, dear Bettina, that you've organized.
Thank you all so much for being here. I am so honored to have each of you here. And the actual rapture finale is actually coming with the Pindar in a little bit.
Indeed, please stick around for our collaborative Pindar reading, which will happen at 4 o'clock. So we'll see you all in about 15 minutes. Thanks to this amazing panel.
serenity, you whose disposition is kindly to your friends, you, daughter of justice, you, ultimate greatness of every city, you who possess the supreme keys to councils of state, to wars, the greatness of every city, you who possess the supreme keys to councils of state.
The ritual honor of the Olympian Games.
For you are the one who understands both how to give pleasure and how to make someone feel that pleasure with an unerring sense of timing.
But whenever anyone drives harsh anger into the heart, you fiercely confront such men of ill will, and with your power, you drown outrage.
Little did Porphyrion know that it was you he was provoking. But gain is most dear when one takes it as a prize from the house of one who willingly gives it.
He who boasts gets tripped in the fullness of time by his own violence. The 100-headed typhon does not get away.
Nor did the king of the giants. They were subdued by the thunderbolt and by the arrows of Apollo, who welcomed from Kira with kindly disposition the son of Xenarches, crowned with the green of Parnassus and with a band of revelers.
This island, this just city-state, did not fall away from the graces.
Connected as it is to the glorious achievements of the descendants of Iacchos, it has achieved a perfect fame, going back to the very beginnings. It is a subject of song for many, as its nurturing earth sprouts the greatest heroes in victory-bringing contests and in violent battles.
And these things stand out, radiant for men as well. But I have no time to linger in putting up to view the whole story in its full length with lyre and pleasurable song.
For fear that overindulgence may come and cause displeasure. No, let my sacred obligation to you get underway right now, my boy.
Which is speeding straight ahead in front of my feet, and which is the nearest of all beautiful things to the here and now, taking flight by the way of my craft.
For you, follow at wrestling matches in the footsteps of your mother's brothers, you the Theognetos proud, the one in the Olympics. Follow at wrestling matches in the footsteps
Also
of your mother's
Clytomachus,
brothers,
whose victory at the Isthmians gave proof to the boldness of his limbs, making great the house of the Myduladae. You win as a prize the words.
Also, that once the son of Arcles said, when he saw the sons holding their grounds at Thebes by the power of the spear.
At the time when they, the Epigonoi, had come from Argos on the second expedition, thus he spoke about those who fought.
By inherited nature, the noble purpose shines forth from fathers to sons. I can see clearly Alcmaeon wielding the patterned snake on his blazing shield in the forefront of the gates of Cadmus.
To make someone feel that pleasure with an unerring sense of timing.
But the one who had lost his strength
But
in
whenever
the early
anyone drives
happenings
harsh
is now on
anger
solid
into the
footing
heart,
with the
you
announcement
fiercely
of a
confront
better
such men
third
of ill
omen than
will,
before.
and with your power, you drown outrage.
Who is the hero Adrastos? At home, though, his fortune will be the opposite.
For he alone of the army of the Danans will have to gather the bones of a son who died,
while the rest of the warriors come home unharmed with their good fortune granted from the gods.
Home to the public places of Abbas, with their wide spaces for song and dance. Thus spoke Amphiaraos.
And I also take joy in casting a garland at Alcmaeon, and I shower him with song because he was a neighbor to me, guardian of my possessions.
He came to me as I was heading towards the navel of the earth, that lasting subject for song, putting me in touch with his inborn crafts of a seer.
But you, the one who shoots from afar, who rules the sacred precinct that receives all, that has good renown, in the valley of the Pytho, you granted in that place the greatest of all joys.
And in his own homeland, earlier, you had brought about the coveted gift of a pentathlon victory at your festival.
O Lord, I pray to you with a mind that is ready and willing. Look upon me as I fit my voice with whatever tuning you desire, as I travel down each path of song and back up again.
Justice presides over the band of revelers with their sweet song. I ask for the unstinting regard of the gods, Xenarchus, on the occasion of your good fortune. For if one possesses good things without a lengthy ordeal, many think that he is cunning, that he is not one of the ignorant.
The way he arranges his life, they think, with straight plan stratagems.
But that is not ordained to be in this world of men. It is the superhuman force who provides, exalting different men at different times, at other times bringing them down in due proportion.
You have your prize that you won in Megara, and the one you got in the sacred recesses of Marathon. And you mastered in manly feats the local contest at Hera in 3 separate victories. Aristomens.
4 times did you come slamming down from above, with no kind thoughts on top of bodies below. For all of them, the outcome at the Pythian Games was no pleasurable return home.
No sweet laughter was there to make an aura of joy and grace as they came back home to stay at their mother's side.
They lurk in byways, trying to avoid their personal enemies, stung as they are by their bad fortune.
But whoever has his lot, something beautiful in the here and now, in a time of great luxuriance, such a man starts soaring, driven by his aspirations, lifted high in the air by his feats of manliness.
With his ambition going beyond material wealth, the pleasure that mortals get waxes in a short space of time, and, just as quickly, it falls to the ground, shaken by adverse opinion.
Creatures of a day, what is a someone? What is a no one? Man is the dream of a shade.
But when the brightness given by Zeus comes, there is at hand the shining light of men, and the life force gives pleasure.
Hygiena, dear mother, make a naval mission of freedom for this city-state as you bring it back to light and life, back to Zeus. May Iacchos, the ruler, be there. So also Peleus and noble Telamon, and especially Achilles. There ends the song as performed here by a chorus which is an ensemble of singers and dancers. Each one had a square. Each one sometimes had echoes from previous singers and dancers. Others did not. But what was very gratifying for the translator is how with all of these different sounds and different voices, it all came together so beautifully in one integral song. And the song making of Pindar is such that it was meant to be performed by a group of very different people. And that's what has just happened. And in my experience, I have come to realize that group performance like this reenacts more accurately the life situation than any effort by any soloist. That's what makes, I think, this event a truly Pindaric event, a true event of victory song, which is what these songs were about. It was the celebration of victory by a group. And I was so honored that I got to deliver the last few lines of this song, because when the chorus, the singing and dancing ensemble reenacts, they can reenact the poet who is praising the athletic victor. They can reenact the athletic victor. They can reenact the celebratory crowd that's there. They can reenact the heroes who are sometimes speaking from the dead. And if I can circle back to a speaking hero that we heard, who is saying, I failed, but my son succeeds. My child succeeds where I failed. And in a sense, that's what happens towards the very end of the song, which is we are told that a human in his or her moment in the sun is the realization of the dreams of that human's ancestors, fathers, mothers, the whole line of ancestors. It's not that the ancestors are dreaming about us. It's that they're dreaming us. We come to life because they dream us. And we are the realization, therefore, of their hopes and aspirations. And I love the way the group that is speaking here, because now the group at the very end, the part that I was privileged to read, the group of the people of this island city are speaking as a group. That's what's being reenacted. It's no longer speaking heroes. It's no longer speaking poet. It's no longer speaking athlete. Now it's the whole group of people on the island, and their mythology said that they're earthborn, that they all came from the earth, and it was all at the initiative of one proto-hero, Iacchos. For the elites of the island, they could trace themselves back to Iacchos even indirectly. So you go from Iacchos to Peleus to Achilles and go forward in time all the way to the present. But for the hoi polloi, it was enough to say we're all descended from Iacchos, the proto earthborn person from this island. And so when the group is saying, Aegina, that's the name of the island, dear mother, it's dear Mother Earth, because we're all generated from Mother Earth. And although the rival Athenians had taken away most of the power of the Aeginetans, these formerly earthborn people of this island state, nevertheless, they had all sorts of things to be proud of. They were there when the invasion of the Persian forces was defeated in Salamis way back when in 480 BCE. They were there, so they think of themselves as commandeering an armada of freedom. And I emphasize freedom because that's what they are yearning to come back. And because this is a dream that is becoming the reality of who we are in our moment in the sun, I can't help but be reminded of another champion of freedom, Martin Luther King, who said, and I was reminded of this by my colleague Zoe, who delivered the first few lines of this song. Martin Luther King said in 1963, I have a dream. And it was all about the dream of freedom, a dream that just as it hadn't happened at the time of Pindar's song for the people of Aegina, it hasn't happened to us yet either. But there's the hope that it will happen. And I think, and I fondly hope that this group that has brought the dream of freedom back to life in song will have their hopes realized in our lifetime. And what better exemplification of that realization is how a descendant of Iacchos, this proto-Aeginetan, was perhaps the greatest hero of ancient Greek song culture, somebody who, through his song, understood the feelings of women as well as men, Achilles.
So, dear all, it's very difficult to say something more after this beautiful, I would nearly say song that Greg gave to us, but it is just my joy to thank this amazing group who was a part of the virtual procession. And I also would like to thank you who are watching us, and I hope you are seeing yourselves also as a part of the virtual procession. And of course, here we are, and our virtual procession is not perfect. We hear echoes, we don't hear each other sometimes, we're all very far apart. And what poem is more relevant for today with this sense of fleetingness? Man is a dream of a shade. So life is so short, it disappears. And ancient Greece is not with us anymore, it's gone also. And all we have is just fragments of vases and fragments of songs and rituals. And if you will think about our procession, of course, there is no procession. We are all locked separate in our distant, fleeting lives, hundreds of miles away. But yet, at the same time, here we are, and the connection between us is very palpable. We are right here all together, and our connection to the distant past, to the music of and wonder of this poem is also there. So I hope that this procession, while I'm going now in several seconds, just disappear from here as a puff of smoke, and even without a puff of smoke, I hope that this procession to freedom, to life and light, and to Muses and to music will continue invisibly for all of us.
I'd like to introduce Jean Bresciani. She is the director of the Isadora Duncan International Institute in New York. Jean.
It is a great thrill to be here tonight. I feel wedded to the past, the present, and a profound future, let alone being a dancer and an historian sitting amidst all of these fellows of artistry and sound immersed. It reminds me of some of the great journeys I've had with Dimitri Vasilakis as he would lead us along the way through the archaeological sites in Greece. And that is why I am here, for this continuity, to bring as well the legacy of Isadora Duncan. She was also an American foundress, the foundress of modern dance. She was called the Muse of Modernism, also the impetus behind the first really permitted dance improvisation upon a Western stage to music of all kinds. The other mission I bring with Dimitri and his beautiful wife, Elena Michalou, is the Delphic Game Reinstatement Project. This we share with the wonderful Mayor Emeritus of Delphi, Greece, Panos Kaltis. The Delphic Games were second only to the Olympic Games in the ancient world, but they also entailed dance, music, poetry, song, theater, philosophy, myth, with sport. And so Isadora Duncan, the foundress of our lineage, was the first behind the original modern reinstatement. She died before it occurred, but her relatives brought this to bear, Eva Palmer and the great poet Diogorus Angelos Siklianos. And so tonight I am privileged to be a representative, to wed the Isadora Duncan legacy, the Delphic Games, to jazz here at this amazingly honorific institution, the United Nations, not foreign to Isadora at all, for her work was considered a great legacy for peace. She was considered the first citizen of the world, surely the first woman doing such. And she also was for the dance for every living person. She traveled the globe as far as Russia, Mongolia, all over Europe, far and wide, South America. She had come at that turn of the last century to remind the Greek people of their profound inheritance in arts, philosophy, and mythology. She wore their garments. She said, "This, I must be the standard bearer of this great legacy, and we must bring it to bear in modern form." Thus she produced what she called improvisationally the movement of the soul. She brought art and ideas together, holding on to the values, the virtues, and the valor and bravery it takes to be an essential original self on a stage or anywhere in life. She was an inspiratrix, I call her, and an animatrix. We are here in this center, which is a symbolic center, a symbolic, in a sense, navel of the world for peace, much like Delphi, called the navel of the world in the ancient days. And so it is an ideal kind of forum, and it is the purpose of a jazz democracy to make it very real. There will be some real dancers downstairs too, following, as we always do, the beautiful sound of Dimitri. So I invite you to get down to the reception as soon as possible. They will only dance at the very beginning. And let us, as Isadora asked us, merge the arts. Let the arts continue in all of us, in our hearts and minds and souls, the eternal values that the Greeks have given us and that are undying and are the birthright of every living person. Let us be here tonight in that spirit. Let us hear the mother cry, the brother cry, the father cry, the sister cry of all creation when we hear this sound emerging from these great artists. And if I may dare to ask you to rise just for a moment now and do what we call, what Isadora called, over 100 years ago, the universal gesture. Could we rise? And she would say as she moved, earth, self, sky, my brothers. Earth, self, sky, my sisters. Earth, self, sky, our world. United and one. And she reminded us, let the artists unite and create this miracle of love. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean Bresciani.
Thank you.